Hello guys, this is Panzermeister36. In today's video, we are going to be continuing on with our 506 sPzAbt Tiger. Last week we painted on the camouflage pattern you can see here. We also did some basic chipping effects showing the underlying sPzAbt and red primer colors, and we even applied some markings using masks and decals. So today we will continue the weathering process by applying an oil pin wash. The oil pin wash is, in my opinion, the most important weathering step because it makes the tank look overall nicely weathered and also makes all the details more apparent by applying fake shadows. So let's get started. The first step is going to be to apply a varnish. The varnish has two purposes. One is to lock down our previous weathering effects and protect them, and secondly, it provides a smooth surface so our wash only sticks around the edges of details. A lot of people like to use gloss varnishes for this stage. However, I prefer to use satin or semi-gloss, which is about halfway between gloss and matte. Matte has a lot of texture, and so it's hard to clean up excess wash. And in my experience, gloss is almost the opposite. It's too smooth, so when you clean up excess, you wipe the whole effect away. That's the reason why I pick semi-gloss, which is halfway between. It's a nice middle ground between the two. And as always, I'm going to be thinning my paints with Tamiya lacquer thinner, which is the yellow cap thinner, because this makes them more durable. I want my varnish to be nice and strong, of course. Application of the varnish is very straightforward. I simply thin the Tamiya XF86 flat clear with about 70% Tamiya lacquer thinner, and then I airbrush it on in about 2 or 3 thin coats. When you're applying a varnish, it's very important to build it up in multiple coats, otherwise you'll end up with a very rough surface, which is not what you want. You want a smooth surface for our semi-gloss varnish. And here's the result of the varnish on the model. As you can hopefully see, there is a little bit of shine to the surface, but it's not super shiny. We want, like I said before, semi-gloss, somewhere halfway between a rough toothy surface and a very smooth glassy surface, because we want our wash to move around but also to stick to the surface. With our prep work complete, I want to briefly explain the entire point of the oil pin wash. Models have lots of texture on them, so that can be weld seams, screw holes, rivets, the edges of panels and hatches. You've got hinges for the hatches here, tons of little details, seam lines, and of course the texture of the sPzAbt. We want to accentuate that with fake shadows, which I've already done here. So hopefully you can see the result of the wash in making the texture of the weld seam here and also the little screws here so much more apparent. You didn't really notice them before, but now you do. And hopefully you can also see that we have a little bit more shadows and so on in the texture of the sPzAbt on the hatch here, because I've applied the wash there as well. That's the whole point of the wash. You make the model look larger than life and a little bit weathered by applying some fake shadows. Now let's discuss the actual products to use for the wash itself. Here I have a bunch of enamel thinners that are all essentially the same thing. Different brands, but they're all interchangeable. They're just the 4 main modeling brands that I have. White Spirit odorless thinner, enamel thinner. It's all enamel thinner, and they're all interchangeable. The key here is not the brand, it's that these are enamel thinners, not acrylic thinners. Washes really need to be enamel based. They can't be acrylic based for various reasons. For the wash itself, we have 2 options. One, we can buy a pre-mixed enamel wash, like we see here. Again, I have a couple of different brands here, but they're all the same thing. Or we can make our own enamel wash by thinning oil paint down to the consistency of the pre-mixed products you saw a second ago. So that would be just thinning an oil paint down about 80% with enamel thinner, like you see there. Regardless of if you buy the pre-mixed effect or make your own by thinning oil paint with enamel thinner, you end up with the same thing in the end. You end up with an enamel compatible paint thinned 80% with enamel thinner. I am stressing enamels because acrylics are not good for washes. Acrylic paints are not good for washes for 2 reasons. First of all, they dry essentially permanently, so that makes them very hard to clean up when you end up with excess. Also, they use acrylic thinner, which is very harmful. It's going to attack the previous acrylic paints you use on your model for the camouflage pattern and also for the varnish. We didn't use any enamel paints on the model so far, so for that reason it's safe to apply enamel washes with enamel thinner because it's not going to attack any previous enamels on the model because there aren't any. But since there are previous acrylic paints in the model, we can't apply acrylic thinner because it would ruin it. That's why you gotta use enamel paints when you've painted your base camouflage with acrylics. I'm going to be using this MIG Ammo oil brusher, Starship Filth colored, and also some Wilder enamel thinner to make my wash. The oil brushers have, let's say, specialized containers, which make them very inconvenient for washes because you have to keep scooping it out like this. These tubes are meant for oil dot effects, but we're not doing that today. It's still a really good quality oil paint, so I'm going to use it for the wash regardless. I'm pouring about 80% thinner onto 20% oil paint, and I'm also applying a second pool of thinner to my palette because this is important for a step later on. Back to the wash, I mix it up here. Again, the mixture is about 20% oil paint to 80% enamel thinner. The result should be a smooth flowing paint mixture that still has opacity because it needs to make a shadow. People always ask about my brushes. Today we're using an AK Interactive 3/0 round brush. Alright, it's been long enough. Let's finally get to actually applying the wash. I simply take a little bit of paint on my brush and begin to apply it to all the areas we discussed previously. Weld seams, rivets, panel lines, edges of details, everywhere where there should be a fake shadow around a nice detail. The smooth surface of the previously applied satin varnish makes the wash naturally coalesce and sink down into the details. So for example, on the weld seam here, you can see it sinks down into all the cracks, but still leaves the highlight yellow of the actual weld seam raised detail visible. That's why you gotta apply that varnish. Similarly, around these little screws here, you can see that when I apply the wash, it sticks to them instead of flowing away. If you had simply the bare matte paint finish, the wash would have just flowed over the top of the turret roof there. But since we had the varnish that makes the surface smooth, the wash sticks naturally in all the crevices. Same thing here with the Zimmerit. The wash will sink into all the details, which gives us the nice shadow effect. In some areas, it's very hard to avoid excess that doesn't actually end up in the little crevice. Doesn't really matter, we'll look at that next. You can see an example of that around the gun sight there, and also in a couple of areas of the weld seams around the cupola as well. And also, edge of the turret there. There's always some areas where the wash ends up in places you don't like it. That's why we needed the enamel thinner pool that we applied before. I simply take a little bit of that on my brush, so my brush is slightly damp, and I can easily wipe away the excess from areas where I don't want it. Again, this is why we chose enamel paints, not acrylics, because if I was using acrylic thinner to wipe away an acrylic wash, it would also wipe away the acrylic base paints for the camouflage pattern, and I would simply be stripping it down to the bare plastic. By using enamel washes with enamel thinner, it only wipes away the enamel paint, which is just the wash. That's why you gotta pick these enamel paints. They're very easy to wipe away, and they're only what's getting wiped away. And you can see how easy they are to wipe away here. Enamels and oils are the best thing ever for washes. Really recommend you give them a try. At this point, we've applied the wash to the turret, but not to the hull. This will give us an opportunity to see the difference and how powerful this effect is. Note that on the turret, now all the details are so much more apparent. You didn't really notice all those little screws before, and the welds kind of just disappeared into the paint finish. Now all the little details are so much more apparent. Now, for example, on the hull, the weld seams, you don't really notice them. All you have on there is the chipping effects. The details don't really pop out, and the tank doesn't really look that weathered. That is why I always call the oil pin wash the most powerful weathering effect. It's a one-step way to making your tank look a whole bunch more detailed and also nicely weathered. It's really awesome. Applying the wash to the hull is exactly the same thing we already looked at. You simply apply it in all the details. Weld seams, rivets. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but you just got to apply it in all those little areas. Any excess, wipe it away with a little bit of thinner. Super, super easy. And it just makes all the details look so much more apparent because you didn't really notice them before. Because the models don't really have shadows on them because they're very small. Applying the wash makes all these details look like they have either some grime or some shadows around them, which makes the tank look weathered and also larger than it is, by making it look like a life-size vehicle instead of a small-scale model. And there we go. As you can see, the tank now has the wash entirely applied to it, which didn't honestly take that long. Wash is a pretty easy technique to do. You just apply it and wipe it away from areas you don't like. And there we go. Weathered look on the tank. And actually, this thing is pretty passable for a finished tank right now, and all it has is the wash and the chipping effects we did last time. This is a late Tiger. It's got that nice sPzAbt pattern on it. That's one of the main features on this tank. And now it's suddenly more noticeable, when before it wasn't really that obvious. It kind of just blended into the natural paint finish. Similarly, all these weld seams and rivets you didn't notice before, now you see them. And by making all those little details more apparent, makes the tank look more detailed and almost like larger than life, because it looks kind of bigger than the 1/35th scale model it actually is. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something new. If you're not sure about applying washes or what products to use, hopefully this video helped you out with clearing out some of the information there. As always, if you have any other questions or comments, please post them on below. I always read through them all. If you enjoyed the video, give me a like. Really helps me promoting my channel to other people on YouTube who might see these videos and be inspired to try weathering a tank or something like that. Always helps me out a lot. And also, huge thanks to the Patreon and PayPal supporters. Those guys really help me buying the paints and products you guys see in these videos all the time. After you're done here, I recommend you go check out Martin Kovac's video on his channel Night Shift. He is currently doing a Tiger run with sPzAbt very similar to this one, and his videos are probably the best out there. Super educational and super entertaining. Go check out his video on applying the oil effects to his Tiger as well. Anyways, I'll see you guys next week. Goodbye and happy modeling.